joining us for this press conference. I think on an issue that I think all of you will agree it is high time we had at a conference like this, and certainly welcome that we spend some time thinking about this very concerning issue, the growing global movement to criminalize the transmission of HIV, and on community-based and science-based responses to these misguided efforts. Currently, at least 68 countries criminalize HIV non-disclosure, exposure, or transmission. Another 33 countries are known to have applied other criminal law provisions in similar cases. Various justifications are offered for these laws, but almost all of these justifications have one thing in common. They misstate the scientific facts regarding how HIV is and is not transmitted. Today at 3:15 p.m. Central European Time, at the conclusion of this press conference, a new expert consensus statement on the science of HIV, and I'm pleased to say we have a copy, embargoed copy here, of HIV in the context of criminal law will be published in the Journal of the International AIDS Society. The statement was developed by 20 HIV scientists with expertise in scientific research, epidemiology, and patient care from regions across the world. Development of the statement was supported by the International AIDS Society, the International Association of Providers of AIDS Care, or IAPAC, and UNAIDS. Many other organizations are joining us today to lend their expertise and support. The expert panel that developed the new statement painstakingly reviewed the rationale for HIV criminalization laws from all scientific perspectives. As you will hear today, their clear conclusion is that these laws are ineffective and unwarranted. Rather than reducing HIV infection or protecting anyone, these ill-conceived laws most likely make the epidemic worse by perpetuating HIV stigma and driving people living with and at risk of HIV infection away from the information and services, and indeed into hiding. I'm pleased to say we have an awesome panel here today of individuals who were involved in the development of the expert consensus statement, who have expertise on the spread and impact of these laws, and who have helped to lead community-based efforts to overturn these misguided laws. Some of us have actually been directly impacted by HIV criminalization. Today, and I'm happy to mention, as I did not at the beginning, I'm Linda-Gail Bekker from the International AIDS Society, President and co-chair of this conference. It is my great honor to introduce our panelists, and then I will ask them each in turn to give brief remarks before taking questions from the floor. So we will hear first from Peter Godfrey-Faussett, who's the Senior Science Advisor for UNAIDS, who is the corresponding author on the new expert consensus statement. And I really want to thank him for his hard work in making sure that these 20 experts actually got the words down on paper. Next, we'll have comments from José Zuniga. He's the Executive Director of the International Association of Providers of AIDS Care, or IAPAC. And third, Edwin Bernard of the HIV Justice Network is the author of 2 abstracts on HIV criminalization being presented here. And he'll give us an overview of the scope and impact of these laws. Sarai-Chisala Tempelhoff of the Women Lawyers Association in Malawi is also the author of an abstract being presented here about how Malawian women activists, led by women living with HIV, led the effort to overturn HIV criminalization in Malawi. Finally, you'll see that the last chair in this panel is empty. That space belongs to our final guest, Carrie of the Zero Project, an advocate for HIV criminalization law reform, who is currently incarcerated in the United States in the state of Idaho. represents the loss to all of us that HIV criminalization laws create. A loss felt most severely by the people who have been arrested, prosecuted, or incarcerated because of these regressive laws, along, of course, with their family members and their communities. Fortunately, prison walls have not stopped Mr. Thomas's advocacy to overturn these laws. He will join us today at 3 p.m. by telephone from his prison cell after we see a short video about his experience. I'm very sorry to say that I have to step out of this press conference due to a time conflict just at about the time of that at the end of this initial phase. It was in fact due to the prison rules that we had to adjust the time of this press conference, and I thank you for taking that into consideration. Prison officials will not let Mr. Thomas on the phone before 7 a.m. in Idaho. So when I leave, I'm thankful to Peter Godfrey-Faussett, who will take my place and will continue until 3:15 p.m. At that time, a link to the consensus statement, an accompanying editorial in JIS, and translations of the statement into French, Spanish, and Russian will go live on the IS website, and the embargo on the statement will lift. Following this press conference, there will also be a follow-on event on HIV criminalization in the Human Rights Networking Zone of the village. At this time, I'd like to turn us over to our first speaker, Peter Godfrey-Faussett of UNAIDS.
Thanks very much, Linda-Gail, and thank you for all coming to this conference. Linda-Gail, in her opening remarks, was modest enough not to say that she's one of the co-authors of this paper. I'm less modest, I'm the corresponding author of it. I've seldom had a publication on which I've had such esteemed colleagues as the authorship. If you look through the authors, these are really 20 names from across the globe of people who are really at the top of the HIV science world. And it was an extraordinary process to bring these 20 people together over a number of times and through much correspondence and email, supported strongly by a secretariat from HIV Justice Worldwide, IAPAC, the International AIDS Society, and UNAIDS in bringing the statement together. The statement is not just about HIV criminalization laws. Because as was commented by Linda-Gail, many prosecutions happen not through HIV-specific laws, but through other laws as well. So rather, the statement is an attempt to help courts faced with any of the aspects that incorporate issues around HIV transmission. It also includes reviews of the evidence around the harms of HIV, because we all appreciate that courts view it very differently according to the potential outcome. It's obvious that courts view differently grievous bodily harm from assault, from murder, in terms of how they see the outcome of that. And so it's important for courts also to understand the advances that have been made in treating HIV, so that acquiring HIV infection is no longer a death sentence, as it would have been at one stage. Many of you will have been or heard, or I have been in the session from the Partner 2 trial, which also related to the transmissibility of HIV and emphasized the fact that people without a detectable viral load do not transmit HIV. I'm glad to say that the statement is also made in our statement, so we are pleased that it isn't already out of date. But you'll have noticed in that statement that Alice and Roger went to some length to explain the phylogenetics of the linkage between people, and that's not straightforward either. Because HIV is constantly transforming itself, it's quite difficult to say A gave the virus to B, rather than that C gave it to both A and B, or that B gave it to A, because the science of phylogenetics is not as straightforward as, for instance, human DNA samples that are left at the scene of a crime. So the statement also includes a section discussing phylogenetics and how important it is for courts to seek expert advice on how to interpret phylogenetic evidence. So we hope that the combination of better understanding of the transmission of HIV, better understanding of the harms of HIV, and better understanding of how to use phylogenetic evidence will lead courts to be able to make the right judgments about cases involving HIV, which will generally show that the person with HIV was, well, we think it would lead to many fewer convictions on the basis of anything relating to HIV transmission or disclosure. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. IAPAC is proud to stand with IAS and UNAIDS HIV Justice Worldwide to call on the criminal justice system to ensure that science informs the application of the law in cases, criminal cases related to HIV. Many of the laws that are in place, about 70 countries, specifically related to criminalizing HIV non-disclosure, exposure, or transmission, and more than 30 in countries apply other criminal law provisions in similar cases, require that we educate the justice system about the current science of HIV. They don't take into account measures that reduce HIV transmissibility. Many of them were implemented or codified before we understood the benefit of antiretroviral therapy or pre-exposure prophylaxis to prevent HIV transmission and acquisition, respectively. People living with HIV/AIDS who know their status take steps to prevent transmitting the virus to others. So laws to specifically criminalize HIV non-disclosure, exposure, or transmission thus primarily exacerbate HIV-related stigma and discrimination at a time when we have the tools at our disposal to end AIDS as a public health threat by 2030. Consensus statement is critical. We proudly stand behind it, but action is required now to ensure that the criminal justice system tends to and understands the science of HIV. In 2018, we stand with UNAIDS, IAS, and HIV Justice Worldwide to educate and to move this forward from consensus statement into action, particularly across the network of more than 250 fast-track cities in the world that are working towards accelerated local AIDS responses to end AIDS. We must eliminate all barriers to that cause.
So yesterday, the HIV Justice Network published results of our most recent global audit of HIV-related criminal laws, arrests, investigations, prosecutions, and convictions between October 2015 to the end of June 2018. 100 jurisdictions in 73 countries currently have overly broad or vague HIV-specific criminal laws. At least 115 jurisdictions in 76 countries have ever unjustly applied either HIV-specific or general criminal laws. Not all countries with HIV-specific laws appear to have applied them yet, meaning that 39 countries have used other criminal laws to unjustly prosecute people with HIV. During the audit period, 9 jurisdictions applied their HIV-specific criminal laws for the first time, with a further 9 jurisdictions applying general criminal laws for the first time. The majority of reported cases occurred in the United States, Belarus, Russia, Ukraine, Canada, and Zimbabwe, with especially high numbers of cases reported in the Gobel region of Belarus and the US states of Florida, Ohio, and Tennessee. Criminal law is supposed to be based on rationality, and yet our analysis of the data clearly show that HIV-specific criminal laws are unscientific and unjust, and the vast majority of prosecutions are driven by stigma, not science. Most laws and prosecutions focus on disclosure without considering whether HIV exposure was likely or even possible, and even fewer consider whether transmission was even alleged. and even where transmission was alleged, this was rarely proven beyond a reasonable doubt. A significant number of people have been prosecuted despite using condoms or having a low or undetectable viral load as the result of effective antiretroviral therapy. People have also been charged for performing oral sex, spitting, or biting, although saliva does not transmit HIV. This long overdue statement clearly shows that HIV-specific criminal laws, or singling out people with HIV for special treatment under other laws, is based on a poor understanding of up-to-date medical and scientific evidence regarding HIV by the criminal justice system and by lawmakers. Whilst some positive developments have taken place in a number of jurisdictions where up-to-date medical and scientific evidence were taken into account, these are few and far between. The HIV Justice Network is part of a global movement known as HIV Justice Worldwide. In our press release about the statement today, whilst we really appreciate the publication of this much-needed statement, as well as the support of the expert authors, the 70-plus endorsers from 60 countries, all of whom are also experts, as well as the IS, IAPAC, and UNAIDS, we must also stress that science alone is not sufficient to end HIV criminalization. The criminal justice system and lawmakers need to also consider the impact of prosecutions on the human rights of people living with HIV, as well as public health efforts to end the HIV epidemic.
I would like to say something first in my own country's language, Chichewa. Zigongwambi as my HIV AIDS kuma ndichifuata imoyo tili kunongolelole. I wanted to thank the women living with HIV who took the lead in the advocacy efforts and successfully impacted on the lawmaking process in Malawi. I also want to thank and recognize the incredible and unrelenting work, the efforts of local activists, local organizations, regional and international organizations that supported a strategic and sustained advocacy campaign when the HIV bill was about to be passed in Malawi. What we found was that where community activists and women living with HIV are legally empowered to understand the implications of the law, the Malawi example shows that women in the global south identify HIV criminalization as a threat to their rights, their bodily integrity, and their safety. The conditions that make women vulnerable to HIV and gender-based violence are not solved by HIV criminalization. They're only perpetuated by it. These laws make women living in gender-disempowered contexts vulnerable to unjustified and unfair prosecution, and increase the barriers that they have in accessing voluntary treatment and care, not to mention their abilities to disclose their status to their partners and significant others. This is bearing out in the Southern African region, including through the prosecution of women for breastfeeding, which is what happened in Malawi. And in the many examples of prosecutions against women living with HIV who are seeking to leave abusive relationships in Zimbabwe. In the global south, the likelihood of inappropriate prosecution and conviction under these laws is high, with prosecutions like the breastfeeding case not being informed by science, with accused persons seldom enjoying legal representation, and with lay magistrates often reflecting the stigma and the misinformation that's already shared in the communities against these already marginalized groups. The Malawi example shows that where lawmakers listen to the lived realities of people most impacted by these laws, and in the regional context, this is women. And when they involve people living with HIV meaningfully in law and policy development, HIV criminalization is unsustainable. While women and activists may understand that the threat that these laws cause, the consensus statement provides scientific justification and guidance for why, in addition, the application of these laws is so deeply irrational and unjust. The statement is particularly important to support community activists who are fighting against these laws and who often struggle to identify experts at the country level that are willing to stand up and address these issues, particularly because so many experts are themselves government employees and are also embedded in the very context that enable criminalization. I think it's also an example of the science and medical community solidarity with activists. The consensus statement will be a tool for people most affected to empower them in their activism. If we can take it a step further and create scientific empowerment of those communities. Moving forward with this global statement, this critical and important global statement in hand, we now have a tool to resist the overly broad and unjust criminalization of HIV that we've seen in the Malawian context and we see in so many other contexts. I hope and I believe that judiciaries will be able to respect the science presented to them today. And by bringing science to justice, we have yet another opportunity to correct this miscarriage of justice for women and for all people living with HIV. Zumwambi.
We have a few minutes for questions before Mr. Thomas can join us, so questions from the media now.
Hi, I'm Heather Berner from Landscape. I want to ask the physicians on the panel. I know Dr. Zuniga, and I'm not sure if you're also a physician. I write for physicians. So first of all, is there a way that physicians in their own countries can sign this? And second of all, what do you see as a physician's role here? Because I also know that physicians have been subpoenaed against their patients. So can you both talk about those things?
Thanks. So we have initiated a process for other interested parties to endorse the statement, and I think around 70 had endorsed by the time of publication and are attached to the paper on the web, and we will try to have a process for continuing to expand that list. I think that the paper, the consensus statement, was really aimed precisely at those physicians who are called to be expert witnesses for whatever reason, not just physicians, but whoever is asked by the court to come as an expert witness, to ensure that they have access to a synthesis of the most recent evidence. We reviewed the evidence in a formal way to bring it together such that they would be in a stronger position to really say what the risks of transmission were, often for single acts, none, negligible, or low. We often think of HIV in terms of high risks, but that's at a public health level. For individual acts, which are usually the focus of criminal prosecutions, the risk for sexual activity ranges from none through negligible to low risks, and yet that's often not how it's portrayed. Similarly for the harms and the phylogenetics that are there too.
Joe, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, so I am not a physician. I'm a public health specialist by training. To my former Chief Medical Officer, Ben Young, I'd like to acknowledge him as one of the authors of the consensus statement, as is my current Chief Medical Officer. But I would say that part of the way in which we intend to action this consensus statement is by transmitting it to our global membership and creating educational programming around the ways in which to communicate this message. Notably, also, both Ben and Paula, my CMOs, have participated and drafted amicus briefs in support of people who have been affected by these types of situations. And so there's a need to create a bigger army of clinicians who can play that role. We're committed to doing so with UNAIDS and IAS and HIV Justice Worldwide.
Other questions, Mariette?
I'm with the Agence France Presse. I'm just wondering whether, if your proposals are widely adopted, it may not have the unintended consequence of lessening the gravity in cases of rape committed by people who are HIV positive, and which under some laws, you may have a charge of attempted murder added to the charge list, and especially in countries where rape and HIV are both very common.
Who would like to end? Do you want to give that up?
So in our audit, we certainly were looking at only acts that were consensual, or things like spitting and biting. We did not look at the use of additional charges for rape or where the sex was non-consensual. And I don't believe that this statement should have any impact upon that. This is about ensuring that the thousands of prosecutions that take place, whether the sex was consensual or whether there was no risk or harm intended, by the person who's been accused. Those are the unjust prosecutions that we're talking about.
I understand that, but that's why I was asking about anything that
Sure. I mean, perhaps I could just add to that, that I think that the statement lays out the facts. A rape is a rape and should be prosecuted as a rape. It should not be converted into attempted manslaughter or attempted murder if the person committing the rape happens to be HIV positive and has, for instance, an undetectable viral load, or even without. So we wouldn't want it to be the things to exaggerate. So I don't think this will diminish the things. I think the court will make a judgment, and the court needs to be well informed about the risks and the harms associated with the HIV, which are quite separate from the prosecution for the rape, I think.
Yeah, I think, Maria, my comment to that would be, I think the statement really tries to set out the science, and the science applies to all, regardless. So, I think that is what we're trying to get.
We have Mr. Thomas on the phone, so we're going to bring him in, and then we'll come back for more Q&A.
Thanks, Thomas.
Video.
I'm Carrie Thomas. I was convicted under Idaho Code 39608 for 2 counts of attempted transfer of the HIV virus. Even though I had protected sex, I always used a condom, and I've consistently had an undetectable viral load. My sentence is 2 15-year sentences to run consecutively with a minimum of 20 years. Despite the fact that Diane and I both agree that I used a condom, despite that I had an undetectable viral load, despite the fact that she's not HIV positive, none of those played a role in determining my sentence. My hope by accepting a plea again was to remove the hysteria surrounding the case, get it out of that, get it off, get my picture off TV, doing the whole mixing all points bulletin, anyone who had any kind of contact with this guy. Not because I was concerned with other people coming forward, because there isn't any to come forward, but more just to say, my son at the time was in his first year of high school, and having his father on TV was very difficult for him. My mom was ill, and my friends from work, I wanted to remove from there, get in front of a judge and just talk about the medical facts. It deters people from getting tested. So why would a person want to know their status if the potential that someone could make a claim that could send them to prison? So to me, I think it flies right in the face of public health.
Mr. Thomas, can you hear us?
I can. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can hear you great, thanks. Please go ahead.
Wow, what a great opportunity to participate today. I know you guys have had a long, busy day, and I'm glad I got to get a chance to hear everyone and participate again today. Hearing a little bit of that video, that seems like a long time ago. I think it was about 19 years ago that we recorded that video. And so it's amazing that when I got the invitation from Zero to participate today, I started going over some of my notes, and what does stand out a lot is the actual case or the criminal code in Idaho. It has an affirmative defense that if a licensed physician had let me aware, which in my case my physician did, that I was non-infectious, you couldn't be charged. But unfortunately, in Idaho, the medical facts of the case were not taken into account; they were ignored. And I remember I believe at the last conference, there was a quote that I came across from Dr. Faussett that basically stated that so this is a long time later, that the quote says maybe as low as to be undetectable, and that's equivalent to saying that they're uninfectious. And so when I read that statement, did practice all the things that we heard about in the video that I knew to be essential to protect my sexual partner. Things like working closely with my doctor, maintaining an undetectable viral load, and of course using a condom. But in terms of the law, all that mattered at that time was whether or not I disclosed. And I know that had the signs of HIV transmission been taken into account at that time, it's reasonable to conclude that I would not be serving a 30-year sentence. And so I say this with in reference to the consensus statement, that my hope is that I will lead the prosecutors and judges to take all the signs of transmission into account. But also that this morning I want to take a quick moment and talk about some of the things that I'm working on now, because over the 10 years I think I've been able to take all the what have I done, or is this all I can do, that negative energy, and choose to change it to what I can do now, or who knows what I can do, and the belief that I strongly hold on to this is that there's anything is possible. And so with that, I share with the men here, whether they're HIV positive or not, they're in chronic care or not, or just struggling to get through the prison sentence, that there's a big difference in sometimes what we did and who we are, that we don't have to be the sum total of our crimes. Looking back again, in my case, I often look at the choices I made were the best I knew how to make at that time. And I've learned well that I cannot change the things that I've done in the past. I can certainly change what I do next. And so as a result, just to conclude today, as a result, I believe with unwaveringly certainty that between all the regrets I had of yesterday and my hopes of I have tomorrow is the opportunities I have right now. And that's why I'm thankful that I get the opportunity to speak with you guys today, and I'm looking forward to the question answering. Thanks a lot.
Well, I do really, on behalf of, I think, everybody in this room, want to thank you so much, Carrie, for being with us this I know it's early morning for you. There is a room full here. I'm sorry you can't see us the way we were able to see you on the video and hear you. But there is also a panel in front here who are sitting in front of journalists from all over the world hearing your story and talking about the consensus statement, so that we can help you take that work forward. And again, just on behalf of everyone here, we want to thank you for your amazing courage and mission, and wish you well as this unfolds. I think we can continue to take questions. So I'm going to ask people to say if who they're directing their question to, and thanks for staying on the line, Carrie.
I appreciate that.
So I'm also called Carrie. Carrie Cullinan from Healthy News South Africa. My question's probably directed to Edwin. We've got the consensus statement, so now what can be done with people like Carrie Thomas who are in prison? How can you translate the science into action to get all the cases reviewed of people who've been unjustly prosecuted and convicted?
Yeah, that's
I think that question to me.
I think it was to me, Carrie. This is Edwin, but you can also. I'd be happier if you wanted to answer it as first, Carrie.
Well, I think that, and again, I can speak what's being done here in Idaho, and there's a group of dedicated people through the Zero Project that are working with the legislature at that level to update the statute. And I think we want to just modernize the statutes to where they can reflect. But also, I think that, like we talked about, I think that it's important that prosecutors and judges recognize science in the sense of that the way that the current laws are being prosecuted, to recognize, bring in my case, the medical community was never brought into the discussion. It was simply brought on a criminal level. And even though the statute in Idaho is a public health and safety statute, they did not seek advice from doctors, whether or not they're from the state or my personal doctor. So that's where I would say that on that level needs to begin, is to include the medical community and with the updated information.
Thanks, Carrie. Edwin, do you want to add anything to the next steps for you and HIV Justice.
Yes, thank you. So the SIRA project is a very important part of the HIV Justice Worldwide Coalition. There are 10 global and regional networks of people living with HIV, as well as key legal and human rights organizations, as well as 80 others who are part of this movement. And what we hope to be able to do is to use this statement along with incredibly useful and important guidance around legal and human rights principles produced by the Global Commission on HIV and the Law and by UNAIDS. There is extremely useful guidance produced in 2013 about how each country or state or jurisdiction should apply, if at all, criminal laws to HIV. And so there's a movement that we are building and galvanizing, and this movement really couldn't have happened without the support of an incredible funder, the Robert Carr Civil Society Network Fund, which has recognized this as an important issue and allowed the HIV Justice Worldwide movement to grow and to actually be part of supporting this statement.
And I wonder whether Sarai would like to add anything, given that you have actually been successful in not using this statement, but the process for changing the law in Malawi.
Thank you, yes. Thank you. I actually did want to add something. In the breastfeeding case, EL versus the state, which is actually the appeal case, there was an opportunity there to work closely with a scientific expert who could help illuminate how there was an almost infinitesimal, is that how I say it? Chance of transmission. It was less than 1% chance of transmission from a one-off breastfeeding incident that led to this woman's being charged and convicted under laws that we have that are not actually HIV specific, which oftentimes is what takes place. People are, I think this consensus statement will be a powerful means of focusing on the intention and not on the fact of somebody's HIV status as an element of a criminal offense.
We've got time for another one or two. Have we, Mark? Yes, just come in the microphone.
Hi, I'm Ted from Village Voice. Given the rate of HIV criminalization in the US, I wonder if the panelists have any thoughts on AIDS 2020 being hosted in the USA. Thank you.
I would say HIV criminalization is part of a much larger problem of the current and in fact the former administration in the US of controlling and punishing bodies of people who are different to those who are in the ruling classes. And things are only getting worse. They just announced that people living with HIV will no longer be able to serve in the military later this year. There is, of course, disproportionate impact of these prosecutions on people of colour, people who are marginalised, sex workers in particular, and trans people, trans sex workers. And so the US is not a safe place. And I think it actually would test the IAS to reconsider holding the conference in the United States in 2020.
Should we take another question?
Thank you so much. I don't really have a question, but I just want to say to Carrie Thomas that my name is Robert Stuttle, and I just want to acknowledge that there are other survivors here in the audience, Carrie, and that we stand in solidarity with you. Chad Clark from Canada, Ken Pinkella here with Zero, and if there's any other survivor that I'm not checking here. But to let you know, Carrie, that we stand in solidarity with you, and we hope that you will be out before 2038, and we're just glad to be here to witness this occasion with the consensus statement. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Any other questions? Or we can, yes, this is another.
Sorry, I'm very talkative. I wanted to ask you guys to comment on how I've heard a lot of activists say that they're concerned about using U=U to try to fight these laws because we have discrepancies and disparities in how people receive care, access to care, viral load suppression, etc. So I wonder, especially the science and public health people, but everyone on the panel, talk about how are you thinking about that right now? And yeah.
Maybe I can kick off on that. I mean, this is not a statement about U=U. There's a campaign out there. This is a much broader review than that, and it reflects on viral load as one of the aspects of transmissibility of HIV, but it reflects on many others as well, and it focuses down on particular acts, particular contexts of acts, to put those things into a graded area, and on the whole points out that the risks are far smaller than many people realise when it comes to individual sexual acts, which is usually the basis on which prosecutions are being brought. So I don't see this as, I think the U=U fact is reflected in the statement. I think that it supports the statement. I think the statement is much broader than U=U and reflects the situation for many people who don't know what their viral load is, for many people who are indifferent, and even people who do have a low viral load or even a high viral load. We still have to think through what the likelihood of transmission is if a condom was used, etc., etc. So I think that it's relevant, it's germane, and it's very nice that we're having this press conference just after the Partner 2 result came out, which I think is, is clearly relevant and endorses the statement. But I think the statement is larger than that. Any other?
So at minimum, the criminal justice system and laws need to take science into account. That's the bare minimum, and U=U is a fact, and of course that needs to be completely reflected in any whenever anyone living with HIV on treatment with an undetectable viral load is within the criminal justice system and facing prosecution. However, our data show that many of the people who are prosecuted in all contexts, even within the United States and Canada, never mind the Global South, are the people who are the most marginalized, who are less likely to have access to testing, to treatment, to viral load testing. Viral load testing in particular, in the context of the Global South, is a huge issue. So relying on viral load alone is not the answer. This statement is very welcome. It is very different from other statements in that it actually examines all kinds of sexual and other acts based on per act possibility, both in the context of treatment and in the context of other harm or risk reduction methods.
Sarai, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that, I don't know if this is on, yeah. I just wanted to add that besides the U=U conversation, I think as Edwin was saying, the people who are usually the victims of such prosecutions are largely those at the fringes of society, the most marginalized, the most vulnerable, and the ones who have the least access to the kinds of science that U=U is able to put forward. And I think whilst that's exciting, it is critical for us to constantly think about ways that we can take this science and empower those who are least empowered, even including clinical officers who are, for example, in Malawi, the ones who are largely the ones dealing with these kinds of cases and would be the ones called upon to give evidence in criminal prosecutions that happen at a lower level of the justice system. I think this kind of information and knowledge will empower them as well in their role as experts being brought into the court scenario. Thank you.
Just wanted to make a comment. I've said at the U=U workshop here in Amsterdam that I consider the U=U message as potent as antiretroviral therapy to get us to the end of AIDS as a public health threat by 2030. And if anything, providing access to viral load testing in all parts of the world is something that we are actively engaged in with so many partners. This gives us extra reason to move forward so that we have U equal U behind the consensus statement of our activities.
Just to add, there is a third U as part of the U, which is unequal, and it is highlighted in the U equals U manifesto. And I think we need to make, it's basically U equals U, but there's also U, the unequal access to undetectable, and I think we need to remember that.
Great. So I would like to thank you all very much for coming. This is a chance to take this consensus statement forward. We hope that you'll be able to disseminate it broadly and take forward the mission to lead to fewer unjust prosecutions as we go forward.